The night smelled of jasmine and blood. I remember that detail with perfect clarity, though so much else from that evening has blurred into nightmare. The jasmine came from the gardens below my window, where Mother had planted them when I was a child. The blood came later, seeping under the door of my chambers like a dark tide, carrying with it the end of everything I had ever known. My name is Arianne Valcourt, and I was 17 years old the night my uncle murdered my family and stole our kingdom. They say I am the last of my line, the final ember of a dying fire. They say I am a ghost, a legend, a lie told by those who cannot accept that House Valcourt has fallen. Let them say what they wish. I know the truth. I am alive, and I am coming home. But I am getting ahead of myself. Every story of revenge must begin with the crime. And mine began on the night of the autumn festival, when the palace blazed with light and laughter. And no one suspected that, before dawn, the halls would run red with royal blood. Uncle Casimir had planned it perfectly. Of course, he had. He had spent 20 years as my father's most trusted advisor, the king's own brother, the man who had stood at father's side through war and peace, famine and plenty. Who would suspect him of treason? I should have. I saw the signs, though I did not recognize them for what they were. The way his eyes lingered too long on father's crown during council meetings, the private conversations with visiting nobles that ended abruptly when I entered a room, the letters he burned rather than filed away. I was young, but I was not stupid. I simply could not imagine that the uncle who had taught me to ride, who had brought me books from distant lands, who had called me his little sparrow, could be capable of such monstrous betrayal. The festival had been magnificent. The great hall gleamed with candlelight, and the nobles of Valoria had gathered in their finest silks and jewels to celebrate the harvest. I wore a gown of deep blue velvet, stitched with silver stars, and Mother had placed a circlet of white gold in my hair. "You look like a queen already," she had whispered, adjusting the delicate crown. I had laughed, never imagining that within hours the real crown would be torn from my father's head along with his life. Danced that night with lords and ladies whose names I can no longer bear to speak. I drank sweet wine and ate honey cakes and listened to the musicians play ancient songs of glory and valor. My younger brother, Demon, only 12 years old, had pestered me to dance with him, and I had refused, claiming I was too busy with more important partners. That refusal haunts me still. I would give anything, trade anything, to have one more dance with my brother, to ruffle his dark hair and tell him he would be a fine king someday. He never got the chance. None of us did. Uncle Casimir had brought his own guards to the festival, claiming they were an honor escort for a visiting dignitary. No one questioned it. Why would they? He was family. He was trusted. He was the architect of our annihilation, and we welcomed him with open arms. I retired to my chambers near midnight, my feet aching from dancing and my head light from wine. My handmaid, Elisa, helped me out of my gown and into a simple night dress. She brushed my long dark hair and told me gossip from the servants' quarters, harmless chatter about who was courting whom. I remember yawning, remember climbing into bed, remember Elisa blowing out the candles and wishing me sweet dreams. I did not dream. I was awakened by screaming. At first, I thought it was part of the festival, some theatrical performance perhaps, but the screams were wrong, raw with genuine terror. I sat up in bed, my heart suddenly pounding, and that was when I smelled smoke. Not the pleasant wood smoke from the hearth, but something acrid and terrible. The smell of burning flesh? I stumbled to my door and tried to open it, but it was locked from the outside. Panic seized me. I pounded on the heavy oak, shouting for the guards, but no one came. The screaming grew louder, closer, and I could hear the clash of steel on steel, the sounds of battle echoing through the palace corridors. Someone was attacking us. We were under siege. I ran to the window and looked down at the courtyard below. What I saw froze the blood in my veins. Bodies littered the cobblestones, royal guards in their crimson cloaks lying in pools of spreading darkness, and moving among them, methodically finishing the wounded, were soldiers in black armor bearing no crest, no heraldry, anonymous killers, efficient and merciless. I recognized the organization of it, the precision. This was no random attack, no foreign invasion. This was an inside job, a carefully orchestrated massacre. And in that moment, though I could not yet name him, I knew that someone within the palace walls had betrayed us. I ran back to the door and threw my weight against it, screaming until my throat was raw. The smoke was getting thicker now, seeping under the door like poisonous fog. That was when I noticed the blood. It came slowly at first, a dark trickle that caught the moonlight streaming through my window. Then it came faster, a spreading pool that told me someone on the other side of my door was dying or already dead. I staggered backward, bile rising in my throat, and looked around my room with desperate eyes. I was trapped. The door was locked and barred, and I was 3 stories above the courtyard where killers prowled. But I was my mother's daughter, and she had always said that a princess must be clever as well as graceful. I grabbed a blanket from my bed and soaked it in the wash basin, pressing it over my nose and mouth against the smoke. Then I went to my wardrobe and pulled out the hidden catch Mother had shown me years ago, just in case. The back panel swung open, revealing a narrow passage built into the walls. Every royal chamber had one, Mother had explained. They were escape routes from the old days, when Valoria had been at war and assassination was a constant threat. I had never imagined I would need to use mine. I grabbed a cloak and the small knife I used for opening letters, worthless as a weapon, but better than nothing, and slipped into the darkness of the passage. The way was narrow and steep, winding down through the walls of the palace like a snake's burrow. I could hear sounds through the stone, muffled but terrible, screams, crashes, the roar of flames. I descended as quickly as I dared in the blackness, one hand on the rough wall, my breath coming in short gasps through the damp blanket. How long I climbed down, I cannot say. Time loses meaning in the dark when you are running for your life. But eventually, the passage ended in a small wooden door, swollen with age and damp. I put my shoulder to it and pushed with all my strength. It gave way suddenly, spilling me out into the night air and the scent of jasmine. I was in the gardens, Mother's gardens, where she had spent so many peaceful afternoons tending her flowers. Now those flowers were trampled, the neat paths torn up by running feet. I could see the palace above me, flames licking from several windows, black smoke billowing into the starlit sky. The screaming had mostly stopped, which was somehow worse than when it had been constant. I crouched in the shadows of a hedge, trying to think, trying to plan. I needed to find my family. Father would be in the great hall or his study. Mother might be in her chambers. Demon could be anywhere. I had to warn them, had to help them escape. I started to rise, but froze as voices carried across the garden. The king is dead. The queen as well. The voice was unfamiliar, gruff, and satisfied. The boy fought. Took 3 hours with him before we brought him down. There was laughter, ugly and coarse. 12 years old, and he died like a warrior. Shame, he was on the wrong side. My knees buckled. I collapsed into the dirt. One hand pressed over my mouth to stifle the sound that wanted to tear from my throat. Dead. They were dead. Father, mother, demon. My family, my world, gone in a single night of treachery and blood. The knife slipped from my nerveless fingers, and I knelt there in the jasmine in the darkness, too shattered even for tears. What about the princess? Another voice, younger, nervous. No one's found her body yet. My heart started beating again, hard and fast. They did not know I had escaped. That meant I still had a chance. She's probably ash by now. We fired her chambers thoroughly. The first voice, again, unconcerned. If she somehow got out, she won't get far. A pampered court princess. She'll be dead in the streets by morning, or begging us to take her. More laughter, brutal and dismissive. I wanted to leap from my hiding place and show them what this pampered princess could do. I wanted to claw their eyes out, to make them pay for their mockery and their murder. But I was unarmed, untrained, and alone against an army. Rage would only get me killed, and I could not avenge my family if I was dead. So I stayed hidden, shaking with fury and grief, and listened as the killers moved on. When their voices faded, I forced myself to move. I could not stay in the palace grounds. Soon they would organize a proper search, and the gardens would be scoured. I needed to reach the city, lose myself in the crowds, find allies. But first, I needed to know who had done this. I needed a name for the face of my vengeance. I crept through the gardens toward the palace, staying low and moving from shadow to shadow. The main courtyard was still full of soldiers, those black-armored killers moving with the efficiency of men who had done their job well. I counted at least 50 of them, maybe more. This had been no small operation. Someone with serious resources and planning had orchestrated this coup. I circled around to the eastern wing, where Uncle Casimir kept his apartments. If anyone knew what was happening, it would be him. He was Father's chief advisor, his spy master, his closest confidant. If there had been a plot against the crown, Casimir would have uncovered it. Unless he was dead, too. The thought made me cold. Casimir was brilliant and ruthless in his protection of our family, if the conspirators had managed to kill him as well. Then they had been thorough indeed. I found a window that opened into a servant's corridor and hauled myself through. Grateful for all the times I had climbed trees in these gardens despite Mother's scolding. The corridor was empty and dark, but I could see light coming from the direction of Uncle Casimir's chambers. I moved toward it, my heart in my throat, expecting at any moment to run into guards or killers. The door to his study was ajar, and I could hear voices inside. I pressed myself against the wall and peered through the gap. What I saw stopped my heart. Uncle Casimir sat at his desk, calmly pouring wine into 2 crystal goblets standing across from him, removing a black helmet to reveal a scarred, brutal face. Was one of the killers I had seen in the courtyard. "It's done, my lord." The killer's voice was respectful, even deferential. "The king, the queen, and the prince are all dead. The princess is presumed dead in the fire. The loyal guards have been eliminated. Your men control the palace." He paused, then added, "There were some complications. The boy fought harder than expected, and a few servants managed to flee. But nothing that compromises the plan." Uncle Casimir sipped his wine, his face thoughtful in the candlelight. He looked exactly as he always did, elegant and composed, his graying hair neatly trimmed, his doublet immaculate despite the late hour and the chaos of the night. "The servants are of no consequence," he said calmly. "Peasants telling tales of conspiracy will be dismissed as hysteria and grief. As for my dear brother and his family, their deaths are a tragedy that will unite the kingdom in mourning." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the burning palace with an expression I had never seen on his face before. It was satisfaction, pure and absolute. "I have served my brother faithfully for 20 years, he continued, his voice soft but carrying clearly in the quiet room. "I have advised him, protected him, helped him rule, and what was my reward? To stand forever in his shadow, to be the second son, the spare, the one who would never wear the crown." The killer said nothing, clearly accustomed to his lord's monologues. Uncle Casimir turned back to face him, and I saw that his eyes were bright with ambition and old resentments. "No more," he said. "Tomorrow, the council will meet in emergency session. They will be shocked, grieving, desperate for leadership, and I will be there, the loyal brother, the steady hand in the storm. I will accept the crown with great reluctance for the good of the kingdom, and Valoria will finally have the king it deserves." I must have made some small gasp of horror and betrayal, because Uncle Casimir's head snapped toward the door. "There's someone there?" he said sharply. "Check the corridor." The killer drew his sword and moved toward the door with frightening speed. I ran. I did not think, did not plan, just turned and fled down the corridor as fast as my legs could carry me. Behind me, I heard shouting, the sound of boots pounding on stone. I had no weapon, no armor, nothing but my nightdress and a cloak and the crushing weight of what I had just learned. My uncle, my father's own brother, had orchestrated this massacre. He had killed his family for a crown. I turned a corner and nearly collided with 2 more guards. They were young, barely older than me, and wearing the crimson cloaks of the royal guard. For a moment, hope flared in my chest. But then I saw their faces, saw the fear and indecision there, and I understood these were not Uncle Casimir's men. These were loyalists, survivors, and they were hunted just like me. "Princess." One of them, a boy I vaguely recognized from the practice yards, grabbed my arm. "You're alive. Thank the gods, you're alive." His relief was palpable, but it lasted only a moment before fear returned. "We have to get you out of here. Lord Casimir's men are everywhere. They're killing anyone who resists." "I know," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the terror coursing through me. "I know everything. It was him. Uncle Casimir ordered this. He killed my family." Saying it aloud made it real, made the nightmare solid and undeniable. The guards exchanged grim looks. We suspected, the second one said, but we had no proof. And by the time we realized what was happening, it was too late. The palace is lost. Princess, we need to get you to safety, regroup with other loyalists, and plan a... Footsteps echoed down the corridor, getting closer. We were out of time. The first guard pointed to a nearby door. The kitchens are through there. There's a tradesman's entrance that leads to the city. We'll hold them here, give you time to escape. He pressed something into my hand, a small leather pouch. Money, not much, but enough to get you started. Find the merchant Torhan in the lower city. Used the phrase "the sparrow still flies." He was one of your father's spies. He'll help you. I wanted to argue, to tell them to come with me, that I would not leave them to die in my place. But the older guard's expression told me there was no time for debate. Go, princess. Live. Avenge them. That's in order. He smiled then, sad but determined. Long live House Valcourt, I whispered. And then I was running again, through the door and into the vast kitchens where I had sometimes sneaked as a child to steal sweet pastries. Now those familiar rooms were dark and cold, the fires banked, the servants fled or dead. Behind me, I heard the clash of swords, shouts, and then screams. Those two young guards were giving their lives so that I might live. I could not let their sacrifice be in vain. I found the tradesman's entrance, a heavy wooden door that opened onto a narrow alley. I slipped through into the night and ran without looking back. The city of Valareth sprawled before me, a maze of streets and alleys that I knew only from royal processions and carefully guided tours. Now I plunged into its depths like a diver into dark water, praying I would not drown. The lower city at night was a different world from the palace. Here, the streets were narrow and filthy, lit by occasional torches that cast more shadow than light. I pulled my cloak tight around me, hiding my fine nightdress, and tried to move with purpose rather than panic. Already, I could hear alarm bells ringing from the palace district, and I knew that soon the city guard would be mobilized. Uncle Casimir would not rest until he was certain I was dead. I walked for hours, getting lost, backtracking, trying to find the merchant quarter where this Torhan was supposed to be. My feet were bleeding, cut by stones and glass, and I was shaking with cold and shock. Several times, I had to hide in doorways or alleys as patrols passed, soldiers asking questions, searching for something, searching for me. Dawn was breaking when I finally found the sign I was looking for, a simple wooden shingle showing a ship in full sail, Torrens Trading Company. It read in faded letters. The shop was closed, but I pounded on the door until a light appeared in the window above. A moment later, the door cracked open, revealing a middle-aged man with a weathered face and suspicious eyes. "We're closed," he growled. "Come back at a reasonable hour." He started to close the door, but I jammed my foot in the gap, ignoring the pain. "The sparrow still flies," I said desperately. The phrase sounded ridiculous to my ears, like something from a children's game. But the effect on Torhan was immediate. His eyes went wide, and he yanked the door open, pulling me inside with surprising strength. "Gods above and below," he breathed, staring at me in the dim light. "You're her. You're the princess. We heard you were dead, that the whole family was murdered. His face was pale, his hands shaking as he barred the door behind us. What happened? Who did this? My uncle, I said, and saying it again made the pain fresh and terrible. Lord Casimir. He orchestrated everything. He killed them all. My father, my mother, my brother. He's going to take the throne. My voice broke on the last word, and suddenly all the terror and grief I had been holding back came crashing down. I collapsed onto the floor of Torrin's shop, sobbing like the child. I no longer had the luxury of being. Torhan let me cry. He did not offer empty comfort or tell me everything would be fine. He simply waited until the storm passed, then helped me to my feet and guided me up a narrow staircase to the rooms above the shop. You'll be safe here for now, he said. These walls are thick, and I have places to hide you if anyone comes looking. But we can't stay in vacuum. Casimir will tear the city apart, searching for you. He was right, of course. I could see it in my mind. Uncle Casimir's men going door to door, offering rewards for information, making examples of anyone suspected of harboring the fugitive princess. I could not stay here. I could not endanger this man who was risking everything to shelter me. Where can I go? I asked, is there anywhere in Valoria I'd be safe? Torrin's expression was grim. Nowhere in the kingdom. Casimir's reach is long, and he has 20 years of connections and favors to call upon. By now, every lord and merchant prince will know that the king is dead and Casimir sits the throne. Most will accept it. Those who don't will keep their heads down and wait to see which way the wind blows. He paused, considering, but outside Valoria, there are possibilities. He spread a map on the table, showing the kingdoms and territories surrounding our homeland. Your father made enemies, he said bluntly. The northern reach, the Freelands, the Corsair Elstay all have grievances against Valoria. Some justified, some not. Your father crushed rebellions, enforced trade monopolies, and generally ruled with an iron fist when he thought it necessary. His finger traced a line to the east. If you want to survive, princess, you need to go where Casimir's influence doesn't reach. And if you want revenge, you need to find people who hate House Valcourt enough to help you take it back. The irony was bitter. I was being told to seek help from my family's enemies, to ally with the very people my father had spent his reign opposing. But what choice did I have? I was alone, hunted, with no army and no resources. Pride was a luxury I could no longer afford. Tell me where to go, I said. Over the next few hours, Torhin laid out my options. The northern reach was ruled by warlords who had long resented Valorian dominance of the southern trade routes. The Freelands were a patchwork of independent city-states and mercenary companies, chaotic and dangerous but potentially sympathetic to a deposed princess. The Corsair Isles were exactly what they sounded like, a haven for pirates and smugglers who would sell their own mothers for the right price. The Freelands, I decided if I'm going to build an army, I need soldiers who fight for coin and glory rather than loyalty to lords and kings. And I need to learn how to fight myself. A princess who can't hold a sword is just a figurehead, a symbol. I need to be more than that. I looked at Torhan, this stranger who was now my only ally. Can you get me there? He nodded slowly. I have contacts, ship captains who owe me favors. merchants who run goods across the border. It won't be comfortable and it won't be safe. You'll need to travel as a common refugee, hide your identity completely. If anyone suspects who you are, they'll either sell you to Casimir or ransom you themselves. He studied my face, my fine features and noble bearing. You look like a princess. That's going to be a problem. So began my transformation, Torin's wife. A practical woman named Mara who asked no questions and showed no surprise at finding a royal refugee in her home. Cut my long, dark hair short and ragged. She dressed me in coarse peasant clothes, rubbed dirt into my skin, and taught me to walk differently, to slouch and shuffle rather than glide with courtly grace. "You're Anna now," she told me, a maid who fled the palace during the chaos. "You saw terrible things, you're traumatized and scared, and you're heading east to find family. Keep your story simple and stick to it." For 3 days, I hid in Torin's shop while he made arrangements. During that time, I learned what was happening in Uncle Casimir had indeed seized the throne, presenting himself to the council as the reluctant savior of a kingdom in crisis. The official story was that foreign assassins had infiltrated the palace during the festival, murdering the king and his family in a targeted strike. Lord Casimir, through his quick thinking and loyal guards, had repelled the attackers and secured the palace with no direct heirs remaining. He had accepted the crown to prevent civil war and chaos. It was a masterful lie, and most people seemed to believe it, or at least they were willing to pretend they believed it. Casimir was already consolidating power, replacing loyal officials with his own people, securing oaths of fealty from the noble houses. Those who hesitated found themselves accused of complicity in the assassination plot. Several lords had already been arrested, their lands and titles stripped away. There were rumors, of course, whispers in taverns and markets that the princess had survived, that she would return with an army to reclaim her throne. But there were also rumors that she had died screaming in the flames, that her ghost haunted the palace halls, that she had been seen in a dozen different places at once. Casimir was spreading disinformation, making it impossible to separate truth from fiction. On the 4th night, Torhan woke me before dawn. "It's time," he said. "There's a merchant caravan leaving for the eastern border at first light. I've paid the captain to take you on as a servant. Keep your head down, do what you're told, and in 2 weeks you'll be in Freeport. From there, you're on your own." I wanted to thank him, to tell him that I would never forget his kindness, that when I reclaimed my throne, he would be richly rewarded. But the words felt hollow. I was not sure I would ever reclaim my throne. I was not sure I would survive the next 2 weeks. So instead, I simply clasped his hand and said, "The sparrow still flies." He smiled grimly. "See that it does, Princess. Valoria needs you." Then he pressed a small bundle into my arms. Food for the journey, a water skin, and wrapped in cloth at the bottom, a knife. Not a letter opener this time, but a real blade, well balanced and sharp. "Learn to use it," he told me. "The world outside these walls is not kind to young women traveling alone." The caravan was a motley collection of wagons and pack animals, loaded with trade goods and driven by hard-faced men who looked like they would slit your throat for a copper piece. I was assigned to the wagon master, a grizzled old man named Fenric, who put me to work immediately, hauling supplies and tending to the horses. The work was brutal and the hours long, but I was grateful for it. It kept me too busy to think, too exhausted to dream. We traveled east across Valuria toward the border, following roads I had never seen before. Everything was different from the carefully maintained highways I had known. These were rough tracks through farmland and forests, past villages that looked at our caravan with suspicion and fear. Several times, we were stopped by patrols looking for fugitives from the capital. Each time Fenric handed over papers and coin, and the guards moved on without searching the wagons too carefully. I kept my head down and my mouth shut, playing my role as a traumatized servant girl. The other workers ignored me, for the most part, though I sometimes caught them staring when they thought I was not looking. I knew what I looked like. Too fine-boned for a commoner, my hands too soft despite the calluses I was developing. But no one asked questions. In a caravan full of smugglers and thieves, everyone had secrets. On the 7th night, we camped near a small village, and I made my first real mistake. A group of local men came to the caravan, looking to trade and drink with the merchants. They were loud and drunk, and one of them grabbed my arm as I passed, with water for the horses. Pretty thing. He slurred, his breath reeking of cheap wine. "Why don't you come sit with us, sweetheart?" I tried to pull away, but his grip was strong. Years of courtly training had taught me to smile and deflect unwanted attention with grace and wit. But grace and wit meant nothing here. "Let me go," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have work to do." "Work can wait," he said, pulling me closer. His companions laughed, and I realized with cold clarity that no one was going to help me. These were not palace guards sworn to protect the royal family. These were rough men in a rough world, and I was just another servant girl with no one to speak for her. So I did what I had to do. I stopped pulling away and instead stepped closer, catching him off balance. My hand found the knife at my belt, the one Torhan had given me, and I pressed it against his ribs hard enough to break skin. "Let me go," I repeated, my voice now cold and steady as ice, "or I'll open you up and let your insides out." The shock on his face would have been funny under other circumstances. He released my arm immediately, stumbling backward. His companions were reaching for their own weapons, but Fenric appeared out of nowhere, a cudgel in his hand. "The girl works for me," he growled. "Anyone who touches her answers to me, and I don't answer nicely." The tension held for a long moment, violence hanging in the air like the smell of blood. Then the drunk man laughed, pretending it had all been a joke. "No harm meant," he said, backing away. "Just having a bit of fun." They retreated to their own camp, throwing hostile glances over their shoulders. Fenric looked at me, his expression unreadable. "You handled that well," he said finally. "Too well for a servant girl. Makes a man wonder who you really are." My heart stopped, but he held up a hand before I could speak. "Don't bother lying. I don't care who you're running from or what you did, but you've got fire in you, girl." "That's good. You'll need it where we're going." After that night, things changed. Fenric began teaching me things during the long days of travel. How to read the weather, how to spot an ambush, how to tell if someone was lying. Small lessons, but invaluable. And when we camped at night, he would sometimes spar with me, showing me how to hold the knife properly, how to move in a fight. "You're small," he told me bluntly. "You'll never overpower a grown man in a fair fight. So don't fight fair. Fight dirty, fight smart, and fight to win. I learned gods how I learned. Every bruise, every humiliation, every moment of exhaustion became a lesson. This was not the elegant swordplay I had watched in tournament yards. This was survival, brutal and ugly and real. And I absorbed it all with desperate hunger, knowing that my life might depend on these skills. 2 weeks later, we crossed into the Freelands, and I got my first glimpse of Freeport. It was nothing like where the capital of Valoria was all white stone and elegant spires. Freeport was a sprawling mess of wood and brick, spreading along the coast like a stain. The harbor was choked with ships of every description, merchant vessels, fishing boats, and sleek warships flying colors. I did not recognize. Fenric helped me down from the wagon and pressed a few coins into my hand. "This is where we part ways," he said. "You've been a decent worker, Anna, or whatever your real name is. Word of advice. The Freelance eat people like you alive. Stay smart, stay suspicious, and trust no one." He paused, then added quietly, "But if you ever need work, or if you find yourself in real trouble, there's a place called the Broken Sword in the Merchant Quarter. Ask for Mera. Tell her Fenric sent you. She owes me a favor." I thanked him and watched the caravan rumble away into the chaos of Freeport's streets. Then I turned to face my new reality. I had escaped. I had survived the journey, but now I was alone in a foreign city with no resources, no allies, and no clear plan beyond the burning need for revenge. The first few weeks in Freeport were harder than anything I had experienced. I found work where I could, washing dishes in taverns, hauling cargo at the docks, running errands for merchants. The pay was terrible and the work was grueling, but it kept me fed and gave me a place to sleep in crowded boarding houses where no one asked questions. I learned quickly that Freeport operated on different rules than Valoria. Here, there was no king, no central authority. The city was run by a council of merchant princes and guild masters, constantly jockeying for power and influence. Laws were more like suggestions, enforced only when it benefited someone with money or muscle. Violence was commonplace, and life was cheap. I also learned that the Freelands were exactly what Torhan had described, a haven for mercenaries, exiles, and anyone running from something. The taverns were full of sellswords telling tall tales of battles fought and fortunes won. I listened to them, soaking up information about the various companies. Who was hiring, who was reputable, who was likely to slit your throat for your boots. One name kept coming up. The Crimson Hawks, led by a woman called Reyna. They were one of the largest and most successful mercenary companies in the Freelands, known for taking on dangerous contracts and completing them with ruthless efficiency. They were also, I learned, extremely selective about their recruits. You did not simply walk up and join the Crimson Hawks. You had to prove yourself worthy. I decided to try anyway. I had nothing to lose except my life, and what was that worth now? I found their headquarters, a fortified compound in the rougher part of the city, and marched up to the guards at the gate. "I want to join," I told them. They looked me up and down, taking in my small frame and ragged clothes, and burst out laughing. "Go home, little girl," one of them said. "This is a mercenary company. not a charity for orphans. The other guards joined in the mockery, making crude jokes about what would happen to someone like me in their ranks. I stood there and took it, my face burning with humiliation but my resolve hardening like steel. "I'll prove myself," I said when they finally stopped laughing. "Give me a test." "Any test? If I fail, I'll leave and never come back. But if I succeed, you let me join." That got their attention. The first guard exchanged looks with his companion, then shrugged. "Fine. You want to prove yourself. There's a fighting pit 3 streets over. They have matchas every night. Win 3 fights, and we'll consider your application." He smirked, clearly expecting never to see me again. "Try not to get killed, sweetheart." The fighting pit was exactly what it sounded like. A circular arena dug into the ground, surrounded by betting crowds and stinking of blood and sweat. I paid my entry fee with the last of my savings and signed up for the amateur match. The pitmaster,